Bir dakika.
Welcome back, everyone. We will be continuing the second plenary session with dear guest, teacher, trainer, and writer, Mr. Jeremy Harmer. He's taught on the online Marisol at the New School, New York for many years and has a long history of classroom teaching and training. Among his books are The Practice of English Language Teaching, How to Teach English, and Essential Teacher Knowledge, all published by Pearson. Away from ELT, Mr. Harmer is a musician, singer, songwriter, and performer. Mr. Harmer, thank you very much for being with us today. We're all very excited to hear about how art, craft, and science collides when teaching in the time of COVID. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's an enormous privilege to be with you, and you will know how many times I've had the incredible pleasure of working with teachers in Turkey, but it's always been, of course, face to face in rooms and halls and classrooms and things like that. But of course, the world has shifted out of focus in the last 15 months. And that's something that I want to talk about quite a lot in this talk, because we've all been forced to readjust to a completely unexpected reality that I don't know about the rest of you, we never predicted. And I've been very, very lucky in my rather long life. I've never had to live through war or revolution or persecution or anything. So that this, for me, is pretty much the worst thing I've ever had to live through, even though compared to the lives of many, 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 I've been very fortunate. But it is in that context that we need to have this conversation, this talk. And I'm going to start by telling you a story. In June 2015, the President of the United States, President Obama, went to Charleston, South Carolina, and he went to a commemoration, a memorial, and it was a memorial for 9 members of a religious congregation, all of whom happened to be people of color, who had been shot by some lunatic white supremacist. And he made a speech of memorial at that event. And there was a woman watching it on the TV. She's an American called Zoe Mulford, who lives quite a lot of the time in Manchester, the city in England, but is originally from Pennsylvania. And she was sitting there watching the TV and was so moved by what she saw that she sat down and wrote a song about it. And I think it's one of the most perfect songs that's ever been written. And I hope you won't mind, but I'm going to sing it for you right now. Why was it so special? Well, because President Obama was trying to say the words that you need to say on occasions like that. But in the middle of it, he suddenly broke into song. And he sang one of the most famous American songs ever written. It was written by many, many years ago by a man who used to be a slave owner, but who saw the error of his ways and tried to reform. And he wrote what has become a song that you will all even though you may not have much interest in American culture at all, but you will all almost certainly know this song. So, here we go. This is a song called The President sang Amazing Grace. And I'll put the words up on the screen just in case they're not that clear on your system. A young man came to a house of prayer, and no one asked what brought him there. He was not friend, and he was not kin, but they opened the door and let him in. For an hour the stranger stayed, and he sat with them, and he seemed to pray. But then the young man drew a gun, and he killed 9 people, the old and the young. In Charleston, in the month of June, the mourners gathered in the room, and the president came to speak some words, and the cameras rolled and the nation heard. But no words could say what must be said, for all the living and for all the dead. So on that day and in that place, the president sang Amazing Grace. The president sang Amazing Grace. Then we argued where to lay the blame. Was it one man's hate or a nation's shame? Some sickness of the mind or soul? And how the wounds might be made whole. But no words could say what must be said, for all the living and for all the dead. And so on that day and on that place, the president sang Amazing Grace. Yes, the president sang Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a poor wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Now, what a strange way to start a talk about English language teaching. There is a reason for it, and I promise you that I will come to that reason, and it's directly related to the reality we have all been living in. But for now, let's move on to the main substance of this talk. The last time I was with you, well, not with all of you, obviously, because you're from all over the place, but the last time I was in with some of you in person, I did a talk, and it was called The Art, Science and Craft. And it was trying to work out what it is that we do, us teachers. What is the profession of teaching? And is it an art? Is it a science, or is it a craft? Because they mean different things. And if teaching is an art, oh, she's a wonderful teacher. She just knows how to teach. She's just got the art. She's just a natural, that kind of thing. That's people say that kind of thing about teachers. And it's fantastic if they say that. Is teaching an art, or is it a science? Because there's a scientific explanation for everything we do in our lives. People do doctoral research on how people tie up their shoelaces and things like that to understand the science of what's going on, or to understand exactly how the back legs of a grasshopper work, or whatever it is. Science, there are scientific explanations for what we do. Or is it a craft? We spend, and all of you have invested hours of your time in training to be teachers. And you've learnt the craft of teaching. And the craft of teaching is things like, how do you do this? Exactly what procedure do you use for that? How do you lead students in a chorus? What's the best way of explaining the bilabial plosive, or whatever the technical stuff is? That's the science of it. And what I said, and I'll go through this very quickly so we can get to the heart of this talk. What I said last time I was there was what we looked at, what these all meant. And we came up, I showed you, I showed people, not you, because many of you weren't there. Of course you weren't, but I showed people a dictionary definition of art. It says, if you describe an activity as an art, do you mean that it means that it requires skill and that people learn to do it by instinct or experience, rather than by learning facts or rules? That people learn to do it by instinct or experience, rather than by learning facts or rules. And that's why people will say, listen, there's nothing much to teaching. All you need is to get the experience, and then, you know, if you're a kind of decent human being, you'll kind of understand what's going on. That's it. And that's why people say, oh yes, you know, he's a born teacher, she's a born teacher, as if somehow some people are lucky enough to sort of literally emerge from their mother's womb and sort of be teachers. Instinct and experience. And I shared with you something that makes me laugh, but it also makes me so angry it's not funny. You will know very well that British people, Australians, people like that, they've got this tradition called backpacking. So that when you're young, maybe when you're about 18, or maybe just after you finish university, you work for a few months to get yourself enough money, and you ask mummy and daddy if they'll help you a little bit with money, and then off you go around the world. And you visit all these unbelievable places, and you have experiences. And it's, by the way, it's not. This is not available to every person. But if your kids, as both of my kids did, were lucky enough to do it, it's one of the great experiences. It's a fantastic experience for growing up, for seeing the world and seeing the difference. And understanding that the world is not just the worlds you've grown up with, but there are other worlds too. And so there are lots of online websites. Well, there were when I spoke to you last time, for backpackers to sort of think about it and how do you do it and things like that. And the one I found, which just made me scream with laughter, and then shortly after that with something close to rage, was one which said, what are the scariest experiences as a backpacker, you know? Because what do these kids do? Well, they swim with sharks. They do bungee jumping. They become scuba divers. They do parachute jumps. They do all these things which because if you're a normal 18 no, I'll start again. Many 18-year-olds, many 20-year-olds want to take risks. It's part of the anyway. So, what are the scariest backpacker experiences? Well, what made me laugh is that number 9 is teach English as a foreign language. And it said it's not just extreme sports and crazy activities that get the serotonin buzzing and your heart racing. For many backpackers, standing up in front of a class for the first time in a foreign country, it can be the scariest thing they've done while traveling. Whether you've got experience, a TEFL qualification, or none of the above, having those faces stare back at you expectantly is enough to turn anyone into a bumbling mess of nerves and insecurity. Well, everyone does understand who's here that nerves and teaching are very, very closely associated. We can get very nervous. New classes. You have to be an inhuman teacher not to be nervous when you meet a new group at the beginning of the year. You get nervous if there are things going on in the class which are difficult to handle and so on. So we understand the nerves. And every one of us, even me, can remember the very first few times I started trying to teach. And boy, was I nervous. There's no question about that. Because at the beginning, you're very nervous. But what really gets me going, it says, whether you've got experience, a TEFL qualification, or none of the above. None of the above? Most of you, and in my case, I've spent years of my life trying to train, trying to study, trying to be a better teacher, trying to be professional about what I do. I've spent years of my life doing that. And it says here, if you've got none of the above, well, have a good time. It's going to be fun. It makes me mad, And it buys into that thing that I'm sure you've been told by people in Turkey who are not teachers. And I get told it by people I meet, and they say, what do you do? And I explain and things like that. And they say, that sounds like fun. Of course, anyone can be a teacher, anyone can be a teacher. And well, what do you think about that? Because I think anyone can be a teacher, but I don't think teachers are born, not made. Because the number of people who seem to be just a completely natural teacher in a population of all teachers is small. The rest of us, if we have a reasonable amount of curiosity and empathy and decency, and in our case, an ability to speak English, well, we can be very good teachers, but it doesn't just get given to us. We have to work at it. And how do we work at it? Well, is it because it said, this dictionary definition said it's about instinct and experience. Well, as far as that goes, I mean, teacher's instinct, we often say, she's got such a good teacher instinct. And that, it's possible to have that. But of course, instinct isn't totally reliable. Our instinct is wonderful when it's the right instinct, but it doesn't work so well when it's the wrong instinct. Sometimes we do things by instinct and we take the wrong path because we're human, and so on. And as for experience, well, yes, it's true that teachers who've been teaching for more than, say, a year have experience to draw on, and they may well have been in a situation before which they understand when they meet that situation again. But experience doesn't necessarily teach you anything. All experience is that you've had it. But you may not learn by it. What people mean when they said, the best teacher for a teacher is experience, is they mean experience really works for teaching, provided that you then use that experience and reflect on it. And so I talked the last time about two-brain teaching. And two-brain teaching for me is kind of a silly metaphor to explain what we do, which is you're standing in the classroom, sitting in the classroom, wherever you are normally in the classroom, and you're doing what you do and asking the students to do what they do. And that's one brain. That's one of your brains is doing that. And the other brain up there in the air is kind of hovering around like some kind of AI robot, watching what you're doing and evaluating how it's going and seeing what's going on and things like that. And you're doing that. And at the same time as you are teaching, your other brain is watching what's going on. And for me, two-brain teaching is a sort of crucial concept because experience is, of course, a good thing to have as a teacher, but it only works if this brain is buzzing away, evaluating what that experience meant and why this happened and why that happened and how can I do it better next time. That's what good teachers do. They don't just have the experience and then go off and have a lovely Turkish coffee. They have their brain saying, oh, that happened. Why did that happen? What should we do? And so on and so forth. Okay, so and then of course we talked about science and what is science? Well, it's the knowledge about the world, especially based on examining, testing and proving facts. Well, you sort of know what science means, and of course there is a constant discussion in teaching about the place of theory in teaching. Do you have to know lots and lots of jolly good pedagogical theory to be a good teacher? Well, no, you don't, obviously, because lots of teachers are not particularly theoretically sophisticated. Many teachers in the world do not have doctorates all about how people produce the affricates or how intonation works or whatever it is. But the fact is, science does inform us about what teaching is about. We do learn from science and so on and so forth. And my own take on it is that a teacher who's not interested in the science of teaching is shutting the door on a whole area of fascination and growth and everything else like that. The problem, of course, about science and research and all that kind of thing is that as Lightbound and Spada say, educators who are hoping that language acquisition theories will give them insight into language teaching practice are often frustrated by the lack of agreement among the experts. And it is true. It's absolutely true. You can read a piece of research on how students learn grammar and say, oh, so that's how it works. And then you read another piece of research which seems to contradict it. And another piece of research says, oh, it's a bit different. It's a bit different. And some people use that to convince them that being involved in theory, just what's the point? But actually, it's not like that. Of course, theories collide. That's what research is all about, trying to understand better. And I think that most teachers who really, really want to be better teachers try to understand better. And it's a lifelong journey, it seems to me. I'm often asked, what is the main quality a teacher needs? And I don't know, you must have been asked that question as well. And I think about it, and I finally settled on the one word I give as an answer always. And I think the one thing that teachers need is curiosity. Curiosity. That even if you're about 120, if that curiosity is not there anymore, well then put your feet up, have a lovely cup of tea, and watch the TV or something like that. Students know when teachers have lost their curiosity. You can see it. And by the way, it happens to all of us sometimes. We all go through stages and patches and things like that. So research is a funny old thing because it's contradictory. It's a bit of a pain in the neck and so on and so forth. But I found this is what I wrote 6 years ago. I said what researchers do is exactly the kind of thinking that we would do if we had more time. Because each account of the research they do is like another piece of some vast pedagogical jigsaw. Sometimes the pieces don't fit and sometimes they do. But the thinking they provoke is the lifeblood of the inquisitive and inquiring teacher. It sounds very highfalutin, but I'm incredibly serious about this. I think that the very best teachers in your incredible organization are people who never rest. Oh no, I don't mean that. Although we'll come to that in a minute. I don't mean you have to prepare when you wake up in the morning and prepare at midnight just before you go to bed and then you have to teach all day. That's not what I mean. I mean you never rest in that kind of search to understand better, to work out why. And why is that student doing that? And why does this activity work here but not there? What's going on? That's what really good teachers do that all the time. And the last one, finally, was the craft. And, well, yes, as I said, that's why we do teach training courses. We learn, it sounds silly things to say, but we learn how to use a whiteboard. We learn how to do a drill. We learn how the best ways of putting students in pairs. We learn techniques for correction. We learn all that kind of stuff. Art, science and craft. And that was the talk I gave last time, essentially, but with lots more examples and so on and so forth. And when we were discussing what I might talk about today, and when a reference was made to this talk, it suddenly occurred to me that you really need to revisit this kind of talk in the circumstances we're living in. Because there's no getting away from this. In my country, our lockdown has been slightly more relaxed than it was. The kids are back in school in my country. It looks like infections are dropping. We have a vaccination program, which is going very well. Now, we don't yet know. I mean, because of my age, I've had 2 vaccinations, so I am supposedly protected now very well, even though, given my age, I'm in what's called a high-risk category. But I don't have to tell any of you that our lives have been ridiculously disrupted and ridiculously turned upside down, and everything we wanted to do. I'm just typical. My 3rd granddaughter was born on March the 15th last year. I didn't see her for her first 5 or 6 months of her life, and that's not a situation I ever want to be in again. Because she's one of the most precious human beings in my life. That's not saying very much. You speak to any other grandfather and they will tell you the same. Well, they should do. So yeah, our lives have been absolutely disrupted. And some of the terrible things that have happened have been really terrible. The suffering, the death, the loneliness, that kind of thing. And I could just get us all very, very, very depressed about that, because we've all been depressed for months and months and months and months. But there are also grounds for enormous joy, if you like, which sounds a strange thing to say, because at their best, the way people have come together to help each other, the way people have empathized with each other, the extraordinary dedication of healthcare workers in my country and in yours and so on, and what they've done has been absolutely awe-inspiring. And we've seen people behave better in many cases than you could ever imagine. You've seen, I mean, there have been some negative things, but let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the unbelievably wonderful things that we've seen about the way people behave towards each other, and celebrate that in the middle of this really bizarre situation which has disrupted our lives. And if I want to talk about how people have all been dealing with the pandemic, with COVID, then we'd better start talking about teachers, because that's what we do. That's what we do. We are teachers. And if we talk about teachers suddenly being forced to completely change what they do, and suddenly finding themselves plunged into an entirely different way of working in education, then everything I said about art and craft and science is sort of thrown into the air. What the hell? I remember just at the beginning of the lockdown, I was having a Zoom conversation with one of my MA students in, I think it was in Wisconsin in the United States. And this was a single mum with a 7-year-old kid with learning difficulties. And she wasn't a terribly experienced teacher, but I was always impressed with her work on the master's course. And she seemed to have a very clear kind of ability to understand what we did on the course. And she taught a typical kind of situation in countries like the US and Britain or Australia, New Zealand, that kind of thing. She taught ESOL classes where she would be teaching immigrants to the United States, people who come from different backgrounds, adults mostly, who need to get their English up to be able to live in the society they live in. And she was finding her feet with that, and from what I understood, really imaginative classes, fantastic. And suddenly from one day to the next, bam, you're teaching online, madam. That's what you're doing. And we were talking about it. And suddenly in severe lockdown, like so many people, she had a 7-year-old in the house and they couldn't leave, and the 7-year-old wasn't getting his education, and he was, as I say, he had learning difficulties anyway, so he had his own challenges and problems. She was trying to teach from a computer, which she'd never done in her life before. And she was sort of tearing her hair out. What was so impressive about her, by the way, was the way that she instantly started to learn. She instantly started trying to engage. Absolutely extraordinary. And she reflects the whole teaching profession all around the world where lockdowns happened. Art, science, craft, we need to change that paradigm completely. It was really all about, and this is what we've been doing for the last 14 or 15 months. It was about trial and error. What works, what doesn't. Look, before the pandemic started, how many people knew about breakout rooms? How many people knew about sharing a screen online? How many people knew about muting? Maybe the words that probably you should teach in lesson 1 beginners is, you're muted. Unmute yourself. Maybe that's the most important language in the whole of the English language. And we learned all that trial and error. Suddenly, what do I do? What do I do now? I'm exactly the same. Oh, sorry, we've gone one too far. Trial and error. What do I do now? Help! What do I do now? And you sort of press a button and it doesn't work and it all goes wrong. And every single teacher in the world, except for the most technologically experienced, found themselves falling into holes and then picking themselves up and then doing it again. And we've been learning how to work online through trial and error. And yes, we have had to rely on experience, because the second time you put students in a breakout room is easier than the first time you put them in a breakout room. The third time you put students in a breakout room, it seems to go more smoothly. There are lots of problems. We'll talk about those in a minute. And the fourth time, etc., etc. Teachers have been learning through trial and error, through experience, and their instinct. We'll talk about their instinct later of what seems to work best and what doesn't. And I'm not minimizing the difficulties of this. The kids who don't have particularly good internet access, the kids who are unbelievably disengaged by being in front of a screen and don't really want to take part, and so on. Well, we've always had kids in class who don't really want to take part. That's part of the whole business of teaching and learning. But this has been particularly acute. But the really good teachers, and it almost forced to do this, had to use both brains. What's happening? Is it working? How are we getting on? And then you have to think about it. The session ends, and you've got hopefully 20 minutes for the next session, and your brain's whirring. What worked? How did that work? What happened? What worked? What worked? And so on and so forth. And what we've been doing for the last 14 or 15 months is building up craft knowledge. Only for so many teachers, the opportunity to be trained has been more difficult. I'm not talking about your institution, of course. I'm talking about teachers around the world and what they've had to do. Gosh, what a shock, you know? What a shock. And that's a very silly word to use about the situation we're in. So what I'm going to do now, briefly, with your permission, is to move away from teaching for a bit and back into the world of music, because as will be obvious to you, 50% of my life revolves around the teaching of English as a foreign language, which has been essentially my life's profession. And the other 50% of my life is involved with music and so on and so forth. So on March the 16th, last year, I got a completely predictable message from someone who was organizing a music event in which I was supposed to be taking part. And I'd been looking forward to it. And it was it's one of those wonderful events where you get folk musicians of various kinds and they meet and they play together and they perform and they play together and stuff like that. And it's a glorious, glorious way of spending time. If you're me, if you're not particularly interested in music, well, maybe I should be talking about football or whatever. But music is my thing. And so I was really looking forward to this. And I was sitting at breakfast having a cup of coffee, and I got this message saying, well, look, because of this COVID stuff, we didn't really know what was going on. It's cancelled. And I was really depressed. I thought, oh, that's so sad. So I texted him and I said, look, in my editorial meetings with publishers and things like that, I've used Zoom. Should we try and see if we can have a little sort of musical meeting on Zoom, you know? And last night, I hosted the 124th meeting of this group. We now have singers and instrumentalists from the US, from all over the United Kingdom, from Scotland, from Wales, from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, from Switzerland, from Germany, everything else like that. And it sounds like the most boring thing in the world. Because what happens? Well, we all sit, you can see along the top of my computer screen there, you can see people sitting there just listening. And then we listen to some of the people who are playing music. That's what we do. And the two people there who are playing are good friends of mine, Penny and Brian. They're a couple. Otherwise, they couldn't possibly be in the same house. But they're a couple who are both a life couple, but a musical couple as well. And there they are playing away. They're absolutely brilliant. I have to tell you, their music is superb. And this was about the third one we did, 121 sessions ago. And the sessions start at 7:30 in the evening and sometimes go on till about 1:15 in the morning. I mean, it's and I'm not going to go on. Well, I am going to go on about it, but I'm not going to show you that picture for long. Except I want you to notice one thing, because it's crucial. Look at the right-hand side of the screen, of my computer screen. And on the right-hand side of my computer screen, you will see that the chat box is full. It's absolutely full. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So we call this Lockdown Folk, and it's now a regular part of my life. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in Lockdown Folk, but I want you to, almost more as a way of having a little holiday from some of the preoccupations we all have as teachers. I know what the problems of teaching online are. It's exhausting. If you have 6 or 7 or 8 classes in one day, it is exhausting. I've seen teachers with a different kind of tiredness than they used to have. Yes, I know perfectly well conscientious teachers are always tired. I made a joke quite some time ago about sort of preparing at dawn and preparing until midnight. And yeah, conscientious teachers have always worked really hard and been tired, but this is a different kind of tiredness. Why am I saying this? You know this, going from one Zoom to another Zoom to another Zoom to another Zoom. I was talking 2 days ago to a classical music teacher, and he was finding it really tough as well. So what I'm going to say now doesn't have that disadvantage to it. But otherwise, I hope you'll see the relevance. How did we manage to make these music sessions work? Because they do work. They're absolutely glorious. They're fantastic. And how do we make it work? We did it by trial and error. You should have seen the early days. Mute, you're unmuted. What kind of sound have you got? You can change the sound settings in Zoom. No, you need to put your camera somewhere different. Where's the microphone? What are you using? Trial and error. People, it was just chaos at the beginning, and people not knowing what was going on, and because it was new. Experience taught us how to make it better. Experience taught us what the ways of doing it are. We used our instinct, and we used two-brain teaching, or in this case, two-brain zooming or two-brain singing or something. And we built up the craft knowledge of how to make it work. And all I can say is that it really does work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the 124th session last night. It would have collapsed before then. But we've learned, that British English expression, we've learned on the job. That's how we've learned. So that much of what I said about experience and instinct being slightly, it may not be true, except that the reason experience and instinct have worked is we've used our other brain as well to try and make sure it works better. The greatest thing a teacher can do for themselves is to constantly have the second brain buzzing around, working out what's going on. And what is it that makes, what is it that's made these sessions so good? And what lessons are there for me as a teacher? And what lessons will there be for the day when, inshallah, for the day when we can all return to a world in which we meet face to face, and we sing face to face together, or we teach face to face together? What will we have learned apart from this bloody tiring teaching online all day? What lessons will we have learned apart from how do you reach the kids who really are alienated by being taught online? What other lessons will we have learned? Well, in Lockdown Folk, my music, we've learnt how a community of strangers can become close friends. I now have some very good friends who I have never met in real life and who I never knew. Singers and musicians from all over the United States who in my life I would never normally have met at all. people in other parts of the United Kingdom who I might never have come across. We're now really close. And what we have, because many of those of our people come to all sessions. So last night, some of the people who were there have been to 124 sessions as well as me. And we are a community. We're a community. We call ourselves the Lockdown Folk Community. We have learnt expertise in how to do music online. People have got better and better at it through trial and error. By the way, I am relying on you to tell me, give me some kind of a warning when I've got 10 minutes or so before the end or something like that. Would you do that? Because my clock is in another room. I'm so sorry.
Sure, Jeremy, we have time though. Please continue. We have approximately 10 minutes or so left. Actually.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So expertise, and through trial and error, we've become expert. We have pre-session chats before it starts. Before it starts, we talk to each other to get the room, which is a silly word to use. We're all sitting in different rooms in the right place. There's enormous empathy in the cross chat. I mentioned the chat box, and singing is happening. People are listening, and they listen really well because you don't have anything else to do. But they're also chatting away in the chat box, and that creates enormous empathy, a form of communication which in a normal classroom you never have. But online you can have that. You can have that using the chat box to create empathy. And the chat box is also a way in which people can express appreciation and humour. And they can say, what a beautiful song. Oh, that was wonderful. Oh, I love that tune. And there's a lot of humour. People make sort of very silly jokes. And then we have contact, support and encouragement outside the sessions. We don't, when it's finished, we don't say we're not going to see you until next time. People email each other. They write to each other. They express support. And every session is different. It's amazing. And I just wanted to pick out those 4 words. These are 4 words I need to take back into the classroom, because one day we will go back into the classroom. Community, empathy, support, different. There was a very good edition of Modern English Teacher in last year, edition 29.3, and they seem to be thinking along the same kind of lines, talking about English language teaching. So Vijaya Kumar and I'm not sure, Chintala Papali and Tewari, they say, look, you know what? Online, more than anything else, online, interaction first, input next. It's how you build that community. It's how you create that empathy. Online, much even more important than in a face-to-face classroom. How to build the community so that people kids sitting in wherever they're sitting, feel as if they're part of something, even though they're all on their own. Because we're working online, they say, these 3 educators, we need to repetition. We need to repetition. We need to repeat and reword what we do. More than ever, teaching online says to us, you know, it's not enough to say something and expect students have got it. No, we need to go back and redo it all the time. Here's another one from Conky and Jarvis, from the same Modern English Teacher, and they talk about things which we talk about on teacher training, about creating a presence with your screen face. The way the teacher behaves online is absolutely critical, and somehow you have to give it more, not less. You're not just sitting at your desk or wherever you are. You're trying to reach through the screen, trying to reach right through the screen to the students. We need more. We need a presence. We need a screen face. We need, and I guess that's what we do in teaching, but it's absolutely critical here. Yes, we have planned stuff we do, but online offers us the chance to be spontaneous in a much more incredible way than in the classroom. You don't have to move any chairs. You don't have to worry about whether you're making too much noise for the class next door. You don't have to any of those things. That's all out of the window. We can be spontaneous. We can react to what's going on, change completely what we're doing, and of course we plan things as well. It's very important, they say, for the teacher to have office hours, because otherwise you are on Zoom from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, and by the end of it your shoulders have had it, your brain's fried, and everything else like that. Got to keep scheduling emails and announcements to go round between the classes to keep the community and the empathy and the support going. That they say, give students emojis which they can use to express their feelings. Ask them entry questions, exit questions before the session starts, after the session's finished. And be a radio host, they said. And I would say that online, more than anything else, content is the key. It can't be about English grammar only. It's got to be more interesting than that. I love English grammar, but then it's my profession. It's what I do. But it's got to be about more than that. Content is the key. Now, I'll do this very, very quickly. I started this session by singing you a song. And the song was called The President Sang Amazing Grace. I have a teacher friend here in the UK. And this will take about 3 or 4 minutes just to tell you this. But this is why I sang you the song that I did. Her name's Anne Cronin-Broussard, and she, like you, suddenly found herself from almost one day to the next not going to the school where she taught, but sitting at home and teaching online. And she was as shocked, for want of a better word, than as everybody else. And it so happens that Anne Cronin-Broussard is one of the people who comes to Lockdown Folk. And I've never met her, except that I've met her. She's now a close friend, because she's not just a teacher. Don't misunderstand me. She's not only a teacher, although that's a perfectly good thing to be. She's also a fantastic musician and singer. And it was her who told me about the song, The President Sang Amazing Grace. And the moment I heard it, the moment I loved it, it moves me. I think it's an incredible song. And she used it with students. And this is how she did it. And this exemplifies a lot of what seems to me things you can do on Zoom that you couldn't do nearly as easily in classrooms. So she built a whole sequence of lessons around the incident I told you of. There is President Obama singing Amazing Grace at that meeting that we talked about. And she says, and so I'll take you super quick through the sequence she did. Now, I'm not suggesting it's appropriate for your students, either culturally or for their age or anything else like that. That's not the point. But to me, it's a magic example of how a teacher, with their backs to the wall because of having to teach online, found the resources to do something truly amazing. So the first thing, look at the photo of President Obama. He's giving a eulogy. These are obviously intermediate, upper intermediate students she had. This was just an English class, by the way, for the church's pastor, who was one of the 9 people killed by a young white man in June 2015. Work in pairs. Discuss the questions below. Why does it surprise you that this picture was taken at a funeral? And it does look kind of surprising, because they're kind of all, they don't look terribly sad. They look almost as if they're in rapture or something. It shows the president singing Amazing Grace. Why would he choose to sing that? And they discuss this. They discuss this in the chat box. They discuss this face to face. Opinions are offered. And this is her take on what happened. And then, as you can see, number 2, it tells you about John Newton, the slave trader who became a pastor, and so on and so forth. Anyway, and then Anne says, but I'm a language teacher. So, oh, by the way, and then she gives them a YouTube link, which you can do online. Much more difficult in a classroom with screens and computers. You can do it online. It's fantastic. And they just click on that link and they see Obama singing Amazing Grace. And they do then they do a thing about leadership and what are the good qualities of a leader, and they talk about the good qualities of a leader, and she does a sort of a mix and matching thing which you can do online, and they end up for sort of definitions and things like that, and lovely things you can do online. Of course, when you first try and do it, it doesn't work and you get it wrong and technical things go wrong, but trial and error, remember? Experience and trial and error. We get it right in the end. And students understand, because the idea that all our young students are technological geniuses is rubbish. I mean, some are, but some most assuredly aren't. So we all understand about trial and error. But then she tells them about this woman. This woman is called Zoe Mulford. I mentioned her. And this is the woman who wrote the song, The President Sang Amazing Grace. And she tells them about her. And you'll see, by the way, in the left-hand picture, she's there with a book called The President Sang Amazing Grace, a beautiful little book, illustrated book. And she says, so she says to them, I tell you what, would you like to hear her sing her song, The President Sang Amazing Grace? And here's another link. And they watch the song and things like that. And then she says to them, and this is where suddenly the world of online teaching explodes with joy. She says, you know what? We're going to have a session. And I've been in touch with her, and she's agreed to come to the session, and she's going to sing us a few songs, and you can interview her. Ask her anything you want. The absolute perfect thing for a language student. You know, if you're teaching in Turkey, it's lovely if you can bring an outsider into the classroom and the kids can ask them questions, or the slightly older students, or if you're teaching adults there. It's what a fantastic opportunity if you can pull in some, I don't know, some English speaker into the classroom who has something interesting to say. And you can do that online. Because it's not like saying, could you drive through the Istanbul traffic to my classroom, which is always a bit of a challenge, I have to say. That you just say, will you sit at your desk and come? And what did the students do? They learnt about what's happened now? Help! I'm terribly sorry. There's been a technical malfunction. Trial and error. What do you do when there's a technical malfunction? Something has gone disastrously wrong. But we're really lucky we're really lucky in the online world, because you've all and the people I'm looking at are the amazing people who run the college, and they're experts. But even they, I suspect, have had the occasional technical malfunction. Well, I certainly have. And anyway, I've nearly finished. And what happened? They wrote to Zoe Mulford. They worked on how to write her a letter. They did fill-ins so they learnt more about her. They wrote the letter inviting her, and they all worked on how to write the right kind of letter. And so they sent it to her, and she replied saying yes, she would come. And then they listened to her song. They together in the chat box and on face to face on the screen, they worked on the questions they wanted to ask her, and they were going to ask her, and they prepared the questions and they thought about it. And then the day came, and they asked her the questions, and they made notes about what she said, and Anne recorded the session for future use. And then when Zoe Mulford had gone away, they analysed what she'd done, and they talked about it, and they worked out how they could report it, using their English all the time, correcting their English and doing that. And finally, what they did is they wrote her thank you letters. What an incredible, creative way of using the advantages of Zoom and online teaching. Now, I've got to stop. And also, you guys deserve at least a little bit of a break. But what I've tried to say is that the pandemic and its effect on us as teachers, let alone as human beings and members of families and all that kind of thing, the pandemic has been one hell of a shock, and it has forced us to learn very quickly how to work in very different ways. And yes, we use experience and instinct and the training we had before and two brains to work out what to do. We do it through trial and error. We do it through the sheer dedication and love that so many teachers have. I have been astounded by the creativity and the passion with which teachers have approached this. The example I just gave you of it's about a 4-lesson sequence is an example of love and creativity, of providing something very special for students, which was a fantastic learning experience, and came out of the teacher's head a way of sorting through this situation. I've never been so humbled by the things that teachers have done as I have been in the last 14 months or so. And of course, I'm just talking about the wonderful things. It's also been very, very difficult. Community, empathy, content, different, making classes different and fresh. It's a really tall order. We're asking a lot. But the amazing thing about, and we're asking a lot, but the amazing thing about so many teachers that I've worked with over the last 14 or 15 months is how they have responded. And I want to say, on behalf of my students and from the bottom of my heart, thank you to all of you for all the efforts you've made, because none of us wanted to be here, but here we are. And I want to finish by wishing you safety above all, and health, and a return as soon as possible to the beautiful life that we all wanted, that we all want to live. And the reason I'm looking around like this all the time is because I've lost my button to stop sharing my screen. So would one of you please unshare me right now? And then we can return for a final thing for me to say. Can you do that one? Yeah, there we are. That's it. So to all of you who've been watching, and to you three in particular, many, many thanks. And I'm sorry I gave you a bit of a move at the beginning. For the first time in my life, I made a mistake about the time. But thanks to Mr. Grant Captain, we survived. Thank you very much for asking me, by the way. And thank you very much for letting me be here.
Thanks so much, Jeremy, for your time. We really enjoyed it. Thanks so much to Pearson Turkey for the sponsorship, and good luck to you as well. Safety and health to you as well. And we'll see you next time.
Yes, I hope so. I look forward to that. I really look forward to that. And to just sitting down and talking about stuff without, I'm sitting in my office, for heaven's sake. That's not how it's supposed to be. Anyway, thank you very, very much. I'll take myself off now, and I apologize once again for giving you a bit of a, scary moment. See you later. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.
That was a great session filled with a lot of experience and inspiration. And we've come to the end of our morning session. Again, I would like to thank all speakers for creating an illuminating atmosphere and setting the tone for the afternoon sessions. We will come back for the first concurrent afternoon session at 1 p.m. More excitement awaits us, and you can join from the link shared by the local department heads. I'll see you in the afternoon.